What you are about to hear is the story of a police officer who didn't believe in miracles, but who saw something that completely changed his life. This is the story of a miracle of the Virgin Mary that nobody expected. But before we continue, leave a comment saying where you're watching from and what time it is there now. I would love to see how far the miracles of the Virgin Mary are reaching. Hector Godley had worked as a police officer in Dallas for 17 years. He was 44 years old. He was tall and kept his body in shape. At the station, everyone knew Hector. He was known for being able to solve problems without needing to shout. People liked talking to him because they felt that Hector really paid attention to what they said. But Hector didn't believe in God. His mother did. She was very religious. But Hector thought that only what you could see and touch existed. For him, everything in the world had a logical and scientific explanation. That was about to change on a Thursday in July. It was very hot in Dallas. It was almost midnight when the patrol car radio started speaking. "We have a call about a strange noise in an old warehouse," dispatch informed. "I'm on my way," Hector responded. He knew that area. It had several old warehouses that weren't in use anymore. From time to time, people showed up living there, or young people who went to make noise and listen to loud music. Usually, it wasn't anything serious. The warehouse appeared up ahead. It was a construction of rusty metal with broken windows. The main door was half open. Hector stopped the patrol car and got out. Even though it was night, the heat was strong. He grabbed the flashlight and went to the door. He stopped to listen. Complete silence. He pushed the door, which made a loud noise of old metal. He turned on the flashlight and looked inside. The warehouse was empty, completely abandoned. There was only dust, some old boxes in the corner, and lots of spider webs. It must have been the wind hitting something, Hector said to himself. He started looking at the entire warehouse with the flashlight to make sure there was nobody hidden. That's when the flashlight beam illuminated something different. In the middle of the warehouse, there was something shining. Hector felt his heart beat faster without knowing why. He walked slowly to see better. There, right in the middle of the floor full of dust, there was a statue of the Virgin Mary. The statue was about 1/2 meter in size, more or less. It was very beautiful. The face of the Virgin Mary was calm, and the hands were open, as if she were blessing someone. The mantle was a very beautiful blue that seemed to shine even with little light. But the strangest part was that the statue was completely clean, without any dust, without any dirt, as if someone had just placed it there. But there were no footprints in the dust around it, no sign that anyone had entered there recently. Hector stood still looking at the statue. How had it ended up there? Why was it so clean in such a dirty place? Why hadn't anyone taken such a beautiful thing away? He looked around the warehouse again. Nothing. No sign that there was anyone else there besides him. After thinking a bit, Hector crouched down and picked up the statue. It was heavy and very well made. He immediately thought of his mother, Eleanor. Eleanor was 71 years old and loved the Virgin Mary very much. 3 months before, an old statue that she had, which was from her grandmother and was more than 50 years old, fell from the shelf and broke during a cleaning. Eleanor was very sad and cried a lot. That statue was very important to her. Then Hector thought of his father, Robert. He closed his eyes for a second. He didn't want to think about that now. He still had more hours of work ahead. He went to the car and placed the statue carefully on the back seat. "Mom is going to be very happy," he said to himself. He was still thinking about the mystery of how the statue had appeared there, but he continued working the rest of the night. Work ended at 7 in the morning. He went home. He slept a few hours. He woke up in the early afternoon. He took a shower and had coffee. He wrapped the statue of the Virgin Mary in clean towels and left by car. His mother's house was half an hour away. It was a small house, but very well cared for. The front garden had beautiful flowers that Eleanor cared for with great affection. When he arrived, there were already 2 cars parked. His older brother, Raymond, was there with his wife and daughter. His father, Robert's old car, was also there. Hector stayed in the car for a moment, looking at the house. He could hear cheerful voices inside. Eleanor opened the door before he knocked. "Hector, what a nice surprise." She gave him a strong hug. "Hi, Mom. I brought something for you." Her eyes shone with curiosity. "What is it? Open it to see." Eleanor unwrapped the towel slowly. When she saw the statue of the Virgin Mary, she was speechless for a few seconds. "My God, Hector, she is too beautiful. I found her in an old warehouse that was abandoned. She was in the middle of the floor, completely cleaned even with everything dirty around her." Eleanor held the statue very carefully. In an empty warehouse, without any dirt. Her voice was different, as if she were understanding something important. "Son, this wasn't by chance. The Virgin Mary wanted you to find her. You were chosen." "Mom, you don't need to—" Hector started to speak. Eleanor continued, "Thank you so much, my son. This is very important to me." She kissed his forehead. She had done that since he was little. She entered the house, calling the family, "Raymond, Robert, come see the beautiful gift that Hector brought." Hector entered behind his mother. The house smelled of strong coffee and freshly baked cake. The ceiling fan was on, trying to cool the environment. Raymond greeted with a strong handshake. That's when Hector saw his father. Robert was sitting on the sofa. He was much thinner than 15 days ago. He was 68 years old, but looked much older. But when he saw Hector, he tried to smile. "Hi, son." The voice came out weak. Hector sat on the sofa next to him. "How are you feeling, Dad?" "I'm fine." But both knew it wasn't true. It was the lie that made the family keep functioning. Robert had a serious problem with his kidneys. The doctors had discovered it 5 months ago. He tried several treatments, but nothing worked. His kidneys were working less than 15%. That's why he needed to do dialysis 3 times a week. His legs and feet were swollen. He was always very tired. The doctors said that without a kidney transplant soon, he had few months, and there was no donor yet. Hector had researched everything about the disease. He had spoken with several specialists. But for the first time in his life, he couldn't find a solution. He couldn't save his father. Seeing Robert weaker each day was the hardest thing that Hector had ever been through. Eleanor returned to the living room, holding the statue very affectionately. "Look at the wonderful gift that Hector brought." Robert looked at the statue, and something changed in his face. His eyes became alive. That's when something unexpected happened. Robert leaned his body forward. He kept staring fixedly at the image of the Virgin Mary. His eyes seemed to study every detail of that sculpted face. Eleanor and Hector exchanged a worried look. Suddenly, Robert started to cry. Silent tears falling down his face, but it wasn't crying of sadness. It was different. "Dad," Hector came closer. Robert wiped the tears with the back of his hand. When he spoke, his voice came out choked. "Can you leave her here? Very close to where I stay?" Eleanor didn't hesitate. "Of course, dear." She placed the statue on the small table next to the sofa, right within Robert's reach. The rest of the afternoon followed its course. Raymond talked about the cases he was investigating at work. He was also a police officer. Maya scribbled new drawings while everyone talked. Eleanor brought fresh coffee and pieces of cake. Hector noticed something curious. His father looked at that statue every few minutes. He didn't say anything. He just looked. And each time he looked, he seemed to become calmer. When the family was distracted in the kitchen, Hector sat closer to his father. "Did something happen when Mom showed the statue?" Robert took a while to answer. He looked at his son with an expression that Hector had never seen before. "You're going to laugh at me." "No, I won't. When I saw her, it was strange. I felt as if—" Robert stopped, looking for the right words. As if someone had turned on a light inside a dark room. I don't know how to explain it better than that. And that weight that I carried became lighter. Hector stayed quiet. Part of him wanted to find a rational explanation, psychological effect, hope, anything that made sense. But there was something in his father's eyes that he couldn't ignore. "If she makes you feel better, then I am happy," Hector answered in the end. Robert smiled for real for the first time that afternoon. "Thank you for having found her." When he left, it was already 8:30 at night. He hugged everyone and held his father a little longer. "I love you, Dad. I love you too, son." In the car going back home, he turned on the radio. News and weather forecast were on. It was going to continue hot. But Hector's head kept thinking about that scene, Robert looking at the statue, that peace on his face. It was just imagination, he said alone in the empty car, but he didn't completely believe that. 5 days passed. Hector worked normally. On the morning of the 5th day, the phone rang. It was 8 in the morning. Hector had just arrived home after work. He was having coffee, still in uniform. It was his mother calling. "Hi, Mom." "Hector, you need to come here now." There was something different in her voice. His heart beat faster. "What happened? Is it Dad?" "Just come." She hung up. Hector got dressed very quickly. He grabbed the keys and left driving. He drove as fast as he could. His head thought about the worst things. His father had gotten worse. Something serious had happened. When he arrived at his mother's house, he almost ran to the door. Eleanor opened before he knocked. "Mom, what?" She had red eyes, but it wasn't tears of sadness. She was smiling. "The hospital called," her voice came out trembling with emotion. "The hospital?" "They found a donor, a compatible donor for Dad, out of nowhere. After 5 months on the list, without any hope, a perfect donor appeared." Hector stood still, processing the information. "What do you mean?" "But the list was huge. They said it could take years." Robert appeared coming from the living room. He was still weak, still walked slowly, but his face was different. There was hope. "It's true, son. The doctor called an hour ago. Perfect compatibility. All the tests matched. The surgery is scheduled for tomorrow morning." "But this doesn't make sense. How suddenly?" Hector started. "I know exactly how," Eleanor said, looking at the statue of the Virgin Mary on the small table. 5 days after she arrived here. 5 days! "Coincidence, Mom. It has to be coincidence," Hector answered, but his voice came out without conviction. Eleanor just smiled. "If you say so, son." That night Hector couldn't sleep. He lay in the darkness of the apartment looking at the ceiling, the fan spinning slowly. 5 months on the waiting list. Nothing. 5 days after the statue. Perfect donor appears. "Luck, pure luck," he whispered to the empty room. But the voice in his head asked, "What's the probability?" At dawn, the whole family was at the hospital. The transplant surgery started at 6 in the morning, 8 hours of waiting. Hector, Eleanor, Raymond, and Maya in the waiting room. Bad coffee, nervousness. Eleanor with the rosary in her hands the whole time, praying quietly. Finally the doctor appeared. Everyone stood up at the same time. "Everything went well," the doctor said, a tired smile on his face. "The transplant was a success. The kidney is working perfectly. The compatibility was really exceptional." Eleanor collapsed in tears. Raymond hugged his mother tightly. Hector stood still, trying to process everything. "Can we see him?" Eleanor asked, wiping the tears. "He's still in post-surgical recovery, but in 2 hours you can make a quick visit." When they finally entered the room, Robert was lying down, surrounded by machines. But he was alive and breathing. His eyes opened slowly when Eleanor held his hand. "It worked," he whispered with a weak voice. "Yes, it did, dear. It worked," Eleanor cried again. Weeks passed. Robert stayed hospitalized for monitoring. The body needed to accept the new kidney. There was always risk of rejection, but it didn't happen. The kidney worked perfectly, as if it had always belonged there. The doctor repeated in each appointment, "I've never seen such a perfect adaptation. It's extraordinary." 2 months after the transplant, Robert received definitive discharge. He could go back home. He could live. On the way back home, inside Hector's car, nobody spoke for several minutes. It was Robert who broke the silence. It was her. Hector looked through the rearview mirror. "What, Dad?" "The Virgin Mary. 5 days after she arrived home, a compatible donor appears." Hector kept his eyes on the road. "Dad, it was coincidence. Luck." Robert interrupted. "The doctor said that the compatibility was rare. He said it was extraordinary to appear like that." Eleanor, from the back seat, put her hand on her husband's shoulder. "Miracles happen, Hector. You may not believe, but they happen." Hector gripped the steering wheel. Part of him wanted to argue more. He wanted to find a rational explanation. But another part remembered. The empty warehouse. The statue. Alone. Clean in a place full of dirt, without footprints, as if it had been placed there for him to find. The emotion on his father's face when he saw the image for the first time. And now, donor appearing exactly when they needed it. Weeks passed. Robert was recovering. He still needed to take medications. But he was alive. He was strong again. Hector visited almost every day. He saw his father improving, returning to be who he was before the disease. It was on a Saturday afternoon in the 3rd week of August that something happened that changed Hector forever. He was at Eleanor's house. Robert was in the backyard with Raymond fixing a fence. Hector heard the laughter of the two. He heard the sound of the hammer hitting the wood. There was an old radio playing music. Hector was alone in the living room looking at the statue. Eleanor had placed the Virgin Mary in a special place, a small table near the window, where the afternoon light illuminated the blue mantle. Hector went close to the statue. He stood there just looking. "I don't understand you. I don't know if you're real. I don't know if what's happening with my father is because of you, or if it's coincidence, or if it's something that science will still explain," he spoke quietly. He stood there looking at that sculpted face, those extended hands. "But if the Virgin Mary is really here in some way, thank you. Thank you for my father." He felt a bit silly talking to a statue. It was at that moment that it happened. The smell. It started weak and kept getting stronger. It was the smell of roses, fresh roses, as if someone had just picked a bunch of roses and placed them right next to him. But there were no roses in the house. Eleanor had other flowers in the garden, but no roses, and that smell was impossible to ignore. It was real. It was filling the entire living room. Hector took a step back. His heart was beating very fast. "Mom?" he called, but his voice came out weak. The smell became even stronger for a few seconds. Then it started to get weaker slowly. A minute later, it had disappeared completely. Hector stood there trembling a little, looking at the statue. The painted eyes of the Virgin Mary that he had seen so many times now seemed to be looking directly at him. It wasn't a look of judgment. It wasn't a look demanding something. It was a look of affection. "Hector, are you okay? You're pale." Robert appeared at the back door holding a hammer. Hector looked at his father, the father who was so sick and who was now well, strong, and alive. "Oitash, Dad." I smelled roses. Robert entered slowly into the living room and placed the hammer on the table. He understood right away. "I also smelled it, that day that you brought her. But it's not possible." "Hector, not everything needs to be possible to be real." Robert took his son's hand. That night, Hector went home thinking a lot. Everything that he had built his life on was being questioned. Logic, reason, facts that could be proven. Everything was being challenged by something that he couldn't explain, but that he couldn't deny. He had smelled that smell. It was as real as anything he had ever felt in his life. And his father was well. When he arrived at the apartment, Hector did something he hadn't done since he was a child. He knelt beside the bed. He didn't know exactly how to pray. He didn't know the right words that his mother used, so he just said what was in his heart. I don't know if you're listening to me. I don't know if it works like this, but thank you, Virgin Mary, for my father, for making me find that statue, for showing me that maybe the world is bigger than I thought. There was no answer. No smell of roses this time, no sign. But Hector felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt peace. September arrived. Robert was very well. It was the last Friday of September when Hector did the last patrol of the night. Exactly 10 weeks had passed since that hot night in July. He passed by the old warehouse where he had found the statue. The metal door continued swinging with the night wind. Hector stopped the patrol car and looked at the warehouse. He remembered that night, the statue alone in the middle of the floor, completely clean in a place full of dirt, without explanation. Thank you, he spoke quietly, looking at the dark warehouse. The following Sunday the Godley family gathered again, but this time it was for a barbecue in the backyard. Robert was doing real barbecue, flipping the hamburgers, joking with Raymond about who made the best sauce. Maya ran through the backyard laughing. Eleanor was in the kitchen making salads and humming a song. Hector was sitting in a beach chair, drinking cold beer and watching all of that. Normal things that 2 months ago seemed impossible. At one moment he was alone in the living room, looking at the statue of the Virgin Mary in the place of honor. He touched the blue mantle one more time. Maybe believing isn't about being certain. Maybe it's about being open to mystery. He spoke quietly. He heard Robert's laughter coming from the backyard. It was a loud laugh, true, full of life. Thank you. Thank you for giving back my father. At that moment, with the late afternoon light illuminating the blue mantle of the statue of the Virgin Mary, Hector Godley finally accepted something. There were things in the universe bigger than logic and reason. Things like faith, like hope. Like miracles. The blue mantle shone softly in the golden afternoon light. If you asked Hector if that shine was just light reflection or if it was something more, he would say it didn't matter, because his father was alive. His family was gathered, and he had learned that sometimes the greatest miracle isn't understanding, it's accepting. Before finishing, I want to invite you to be part of our prayer community for the Virgin Mary. A space of faith and hope where people from all over the world unite to pray and share graces received. If you feel in your heart the desire to be part of this prayer chain, click below and become a channel member today and come pray with us. And look, if you made it here to the end of Hector's story, do something for me. Write in the comments, "Miracle of the Virgin Mary," because some things have no explanation, only gratitude. I want to see how many hearts this story really reached. And every time I read "Miracle of the Virgin Mary" in the comments, I'll know that one more person believes that miracles of the Virgin Mary still happen. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. Share this video with someone who needs to renew hope today. May the Virgin Mary continue blessing and protecting you and your family. Amen.